The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Missouri Governor Mike Parson surprised both parties when he vetoed scores of projects within the 2024 budget. And now members of both parties are wondering whether they'll override the chief executive's objections in September. On the latest episode of Politically Speaking, State Representative Ashley Aune talks about reaction to the governor's vetoes and takes a look ahead to the 2024 session. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
My promise to St. Louis was that I would do the absolute most for each and every person, starting with those who have the very least.
What I wanted to do was look and see what other states are doing.
We have to be willing to change those laws, that they are balanced and they affect everybody equally.
As somebody that grew up in the St. Louis area, in North St. Louis County, I didn't know any lawyers growing up.
We got to find long-term solutions to make government better, but also to be able to provide services to people.
I don't want to leave that federal money that we've been leaving all these years on the table.
We need to be spending this money to take care of Missourians.
I thought we accomplished a lot this year, but a lot more needs to be done.
Welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, State House and politics reporter Sarah Kellogg. Joining me in studio in St. Louis, I'm in St. Louis this time, is my co-host, St. Louis Public Radio's political correspondent,
Jason Rosenbaum.
And our guest today joining us via Zoom, she represents the 14th District in the Missouri House, which includes the Kansas City Northland.
Ashley Aune.
Thank you so much for joining us again on the show, Representative. Before we get started, I'd love if you reminded our listeners about your district, where it covers, and who you represent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so glad to be on again. Thank you so much for inviting me. The 14th District is in Platte County. We are not the southernmost or the northernmost part of Platte. We are sort of in the middle, and on the east edge, we share a line with Platte County. So it's a very 50-50 district up here, and it flipped blue in 2018. So we're still holding strong up here.
So we have a lot to talk about. I just want to get right into it, which is, let's start with the kind of most recent news coming out of the legislature, which is the vetoes by Governor Mike Parson on the budget. So what was your reaction to Governor Parson vetoing nearly $555 million worth of projects from the budget?
You know, we have a multi-billion-dollar surplus. It's a one-time opportunity to spend state dollars. And I was disappointed to see a lot of the vetoes that came down from the governor, because I think that especially around public safety, mental health, even our National Guard, I think we have some seriously missed opportunities to invest in Missourians.
You know, that decision brought about some pretty harsh reactions from Republicans, including Senator Nick Schroer. Here is the St. Charles County Republican talking about Parson's veto of projects to bolster public safety and drinking water quality in his county.
Our citizens were betrayed. We were all very happy to see that the legislature, the House and the Senate, put this into the budget. We supported this all the way to the governor's desk, and not a single email, text message, phone call, letter, carrier pigeon, or one of those owls from Harry Potter. None of that came our way, whether it was myself, Senator Eigel, Senator Fitzwater, or any of the House members that have worked the entire year, and some of them several years, on these items. And, you know, there was no explanation whatsoever as to why these were line item vetoed.
So pretty strong words. Schroer says he was surprised by Parson's move. Were you also taken off guard?
I was a little bit. And there are even line item vetoes that the senator is referencing that I was surprised to have seen vetoed. A lot of public safety dollars that you would think, a pro-police, pro-public safety governor would have an interest in keeping in, but they were slashed.
You know, these vetoes aren't quite set in stone just yet. What do you think the chances are that the legislature may successfully overturn some of these vetoes during the veto session in September?
think that's a really great question. And honestly, I don't know yet because what I've heard, I keep hearing rumblings from folks who are unhappy on both sides of the aisle with these vetoes. And it'll be really interesting to see if, over the next month or so, there gains a consensus across the aisle about which items we'd like to keep in generally. And if there's a consensus around each of those, individually, of course, that's the challenge, right? With these vetoes, it may be really important to one legislator, but less important to others. And so we'll have to find that consensus where it exists. And I do think that there may be an opportunity this September.
There's also, it's been kind of Senate tradition in the years that, obviously budget bills start in the House and anyone can kind of bring that up. But in the Senate, it's been tradition that the sponsor of the bill is one to bring it up. There's been some kerfuffles that I personally have witnessed the last couple of years about that.
That's one way of putting it.
I'm being very kind about that. So very kerfuffle-y disagreements about that. And that was also because budget chair was Senator Dan Hegeman. Well, now we have a new appropriations chair with Senator Lincoln Hough. So do you think kind of that change in leadership also brings kind of a possibility of mixing things up?
Yes, I do, because I think that the Senate and the House are often pretty diametrically opposed when it comes to hashing out the intricacies of the budget. The budget we send over to the Senate doesn't look anything like the budget that gets sent back to us. So I do think that makes it interesting because I think what we see is we have an appropriations chair in the Senate who has a different opinion than the budget chair in the House, who has a different opinion than the governor. And then, of course, you have all of the elected officials, all of the legislators in both chambers who are going to weigh in on some level as well. So just a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts, and a lot of priorities.
Okay, so when I ask this question, I have to disclose to listeners that this is a piece of legislation that will affect me when I'm 65 because I am a vested pensioner in the UM system. One of the things that Parson mentioned was how legislation that passed near the end of session that would have removed taxes on Social Security and state pensions, it was going to reduce state revenue, and he had to account for that. Do you think that that's a justifiable reason to veto a lot of these projects?
I don't. I think that one of the things that, like I said, we had a one-time surplus, and I think that as a legislature, we took that opportunity and spent that money or tried to spend that money in ways that we believed would best benefit Missourians. And so for, one of those ways is to help our seniors. We know, and we're seeing it across a lot of our communities in Missouri where property taxes are being raised, and it's just getting more and more difficult for seniors to live on fixed incomes with inflation rising, all of those things. And, when the legislature tries to do that, hearing from the governor that is, not an option when we have so much money, in the coffer, it's disappointing.
You are an excellent seguer, first of all, because my next question was going to be about the main thing that was in that bill, which is it's like a little bit complicated to explain, but it basically authorizes counties through either an ordinance or a referendum to freeze property taxes for seniors. And my understanding is some counties on the western side of the state may end up opting into that program. Do you think that was a good thing for the legislature to pass?
Yeah, so I have mixed feelings on this one. I think that a lot of times in the legislature, we have to sort of, when we talk about compromise, a lot of times we take the good with the bad. The reason I support this legislation is because our seniors need relief. One of the aspects of the legislation that I find challenging is that there's not a way to only include folks who need it, right? There's not a needs assessment included. So it doesn't matter what your wealth level is, you could qualify for this. So folks who maybe don't need the relief as much as others are going to be getting it, which, I think however you feel about property taxes, one of the things that we say up here in the Northland, and we said this at Jamie Johnson and I said this at our town hall last week, is, the way we look at it is paying taxes is the price you pay for living in a civilized society. And, our community does, here in Platte, I can speak to that specifically, is we do everything we can to make sure that we're supporting our seniors and our schools and all of our community endeavors through our property taxes. And making sure that we're paying into the system is really important. But at the same time, like I said, our seniors need relief. And so I would like to see that happen here in Platte County. But I'd also like to see us address the challenges that we have in our tax code top to bottom. We can't just come in with these Band-Aid fixes for folks one at a time. We need to look at our tax code across the state, across our municipalities, and make sure that folks are paying their fair share and we're also able to afford the things that our community needs to provide for folks, like good schools.
So the St. Louis County Council actually rejected opting in to the senior property tax freeze earlier this week. And Councilwoman Lisa Clancy of Maplewood cited exactly what you just talked about, how there is no means test, that everybody could be eligible for this, even if they own a $10 million mansion. Here is Councilwoman Clancy elaborating on that.
I also am a taxpayer, and I am the only one sitting up here tonight. Now, if Councilwoman Dunaway was here, she would also be able to say this, but she's virtual, that has a student in our K-12 public school system. And as a parent of a soon-to-be first grader, I am deeply concerned about underfunding of public education in our state. This bill is anti-public education, and as we heard tonight at our hearing, it's also anti-public safety. It has huge ramifications for our fire districts and firefighters.
So one of the things that other people on the council suggested is that the legislature could potentially change the program and maybe add a means test or make it more restrictive. But is that really a realistic possibility next year, given that, I don't know, maybe some of your colleagues don't want a means test with this program?
Yeah, we actually, that was one of our arguments when this bill was being debated in the House this year. It's one of our arguments on the Democratic side, is that we would like to see a means test. We tried to get that included. And so unfortunately, no, we weren't able to pass it with that means testing. And I don't believe that the supermajority Republican legislature has any interest in adjusting it.
So I want to move on to the 2024 session. What do you think could happen next year? I know that, Crystal Quaid, House Minority Leader Crystal Quaid said, a lot of dysfunction this year. That wasn't during an election year. Well, 2024 is an election year. Do you think that this election, could get in the way of serious policymaking?
Absolutely, it will. I have no doubt in my mind that it will get in the way of policymaking. It is an election year, but on top of that, it's a presidential election year where the speaker is running for lieutenant governor, our minority leader is running for governor, right? We have folks who are running in 3-4-way Senate primaries against one another on the right side of the aisle, and it's just going to be. It's going to be wild. It really will. Everyone's going to try to out-conservative one another for their primaries. And I think that is going to cause a lot of social issues to rise to the top of the conversation and not talk about the serious policy and the serious issues that will actually help Missourians.
As far as bills that might get brought again, the one bill Parson vetoed that wasn't budget related was a wide-ranging policy public safety bill on criminal law. It included increased compensation to people whose convictions were overturned. Parson said that the state, Parson basically mentioned that provision in his veto and said that the state shouldn't be responsible for the malfeasance of a local prosecutor. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting reasoning to veto that provision or that bill for that provision, because at the end of the day, these prosecutors are prosecuting because of a state law that was broken. They also, at the end of the day, our prosecutors are all sort of rowing in the same direction, right? They're doing the work for the state, for their communities. And so for the state to say, oh, that's not our problem, I think that's incredibly disingenuous.
That legislation itself, being in that committee hearing, there were lots of nods, and it seems like a lot of sympathy from both Republicans and Democrats on this. So it's definitely a bipartisan issue. Do you think that there's a way where maybe that could get reworded next year, or something that modified that would basically get Parson's signature? Or do you think maybe y'all will just be waiting until the next governor?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I would love to see us go back and try to work with the governor's office and make this language palatable, because there are folks who could genuinely benefit from this right now, and Missouri owes it to them to get this done.
The bill also included what's known as Blair's Law, which would criminalize celebratory gunfire. Do you think that could at least reach the finish line next year, or is it going to get swept into another omnibus bill?
Wow, I would love to see it. Representative Mark Sharp, and before him, and currently, but Representative and now Senator Razor, they've been working on this, and a ton of other legislators have been working on this for years. Blair's family comes down to the Capitol every single year to testify and to share their story and their pain with lawmakers. And it is an absolute shame that we still have not gotten this done for them. It's so simple to me. It's such a no-brainer to me, and I guess I'm so very disappointed in this veto because of that, and I genuinely hope that it gets across the finish line for good next year.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with that, can you give kind of the circumstances of that and why there is this push for this law?
Of course. So Blair was killed by celebratory gunfire. And I'm not going to get the years correct, but it was several years ago. She was a young girl, and she was killed by celebratory gunfire, because when you shoot a gun up in the air for whatever reason, guess what? That bullet has to come down. And I think that it is really too bad that that is not criminalized yet in Missouri. But I think that it also speaks to our pretty lax gun laws in Missouri as well, that we still struggle to get something like this across the finish line.
So you mentioned that you're in a pretty swing area of Platte County, and this is a more basic question, but I'm genuinely interested to hear the answer. When you go door to door and talk with people and the issue of guns comes up, what are people saying to you?
I get a lot of mixed concerns about guns in my district, as you can imagine, being in the 50-50 district. But I think that really just speaks to the nuance of the issue, because I do represent a very moderate district. That means a lot of the folks who vote for me are either center left or center right, but don't identify with an extreme of either party. And so, one of the challenges of being in a legislature and being in a partisan position is that these issues, it's kind of like bad to talk about the nuance of the issue, right? It's bad to dive into the nuances and the challenges and of such a big issue like gun control. And what I tell people at doors and what I hear from people is that I am a gun owner. I am also a Moms Demand Action member. Those two things can live in harmony together. And I explain to folks that, yes, I'm comfortable with firearms. I understand, how to safely store a firearm. I also don't want to have anxiety over sending my stepkid to school every day, right? I don't want my heart to feel like it's ripped out of my chest every time I get an alert about another school shooting or mass shooting incident in our country. It was in our own backyard. Just last year, we had a school shooting in Missouri, and that should hit home to folks, and it does hit home to folks. I have parents in Platte County who beg me to do something to keep their kids safe, and then I have people begging me to not touch gun laws because they want their Second Amendment rights preserved. And what I say to both of those people is, I think that we can do that. We can protect your rights. We can also keep people safe, but we have to be reasonable about it. And most folks agree with that stance.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
And we're back on Politically Speaking. Our guest in this episode is Democratic Representative Ashley Aune, who represents the 14th District of the Missouri House of Representatives, which includes the Kansas City Northland, among other areas. I want to get back into talking about ballot measures, which that was a topic that was pretty much forefront and center. Many Republicans said that was their number one priority going into the session, and it didn't get done. Do you think that lawmakers will again try to pass a measure making it more difficult to amend Missouri's constitution in the upcoming session?
I do think that they will come back and try it again. I do think a lot of steam has been taken out of their push for initiative petition reform because I really think that Speaker Plocker gave away the game on the last day of session when he essentially said that if the Senate refused to pass the bill, they would essentially be responsible for legalizing abortion in Missouri because the true effort behind initiative petition reform at the end of the day was to prevent a ballot initiative around abortion. Well, they failed to do that in the timeline that they needed. And so I'm not sure how passionately they'll be going after this again next year. But I do think it'll be something that folks are still talking about, unfortunately.
You know, there was an effort to do this in Arkansas that failed. There's a vote coming up soon in Ohio on raising the threshold to 60% to amend the Constitution. If that fails, do you think Missouri Republicans just may abandon that effort because they're just kind of seeing the writing on the wall in other states?
Man, I would love to say that, yeah, that would dissuade them from trying it further here in Missouri. But if history tells me anything, it's that that doesn't really matter. I think that there are people who voted for the bill this year who behind closed doors will admit that they don't believe that this will pass on the ballot, because even if this does pass the legislature, it still has to go to a vote of the people. And I'm sorry, but Missouri voters do not want their voices taken away. They just don't, and they'll see it for what it is. It's removing access to democracy for voters, and it's taken us a step backwards in Missouri. So hopefully they'll see it go down in flames in Ohio, and the renewed effort will be pretty weak here, but we'll see.
Speaking of ballot measures, there's a widespread assumption that proponents of abortion rights will try to put something on the ballot to overturn the state's ban of procedure, as you've mentioned already, but we don't know what that proposal will actually do yet. If you were to legalize abortion in Missouri, how would you do that? And would there be a limit that would get broad support among voters?
Yeah, so, that's a tough question. What I would say is, yes, of course, I want women in this state to have access to reproductive care. I think that when we talk about the issue of abortion, we talk about it like it isn't just a medical procedure. I'm not a proponent of abortion any more than I'm a proponent of open heart surgery. I just think that they're both medically necessary in certain situations, and I'm certainly not the expert to be weighing in on that. So what I would like to see is language that resonates with Missourians. And that may include limits. That may include something that looked more like Roe. That may include, which the limit is viability, of course, there. But yeah, I'd like to see something that resonates with Missourians by and large, because Missourians by and large do support access to care. The polling shows that. And so we just need to make sure that we get the language right, and that we make sure that folks have access to the best possible care. And we stopped this trend of demonizing providers and scaring them away from providing care in our state. We're seeing labor and delivery centers across the state, specifically in our rural areas, closing right now. And that's just absolutely devastating. And we've got to do something. So whatever that looks like, whatever the ballot initiative language ends up being, I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited to start collecting some signatures and getting this on the ballot.
Well, before you can do that, assuming that this is the vehicle to end up legalizing abortion, because there could be another group that presents something else. Mm-hmm. There has been a group that has submitted a number of petitions, and that has been kind of in limbo because of this fight between Auditor Fitzpatrick and Attorney General Bailey over the authority of approving a fiscal note. And if you want to get even more down this legal rabbit hole, the proponents of this are going to have to sue Secretary of State Ashcroft because they don't like the ballot language.
They've already indicated that I've seen kind of previews of that and they don't like it. So that's another lawsuit that they're going to have to go through.
My question is, yes, there is time to collect the signatures, but I think that the proponents of this have pointed out that they've lost 3 or 4 months of being able to collect signatures, and they haven't been able to say which one they're going to put forward because they're in legal limbo. Do you think that there will be enough time to get something on the ballot by next year?
I do. I'm very optimistic about it because there's so much passion behind it. There are so many people who understand how desperately we need this in Missouri and how successful these initiatives have been in other states like Kansas. And we've seen the blueprint there, and we know we can get it done here. So I think there's enough passion behind it that folks are really working hard. But I got to give Republicans credit. They're certainly putting up every roadblock they can find.
Yeah. Are there concerns that this stalemate between the auditor and the attorney general is kind of going to set a precedent when it comes to ballot initiatives that maybe the people who have been elected to those offices don't like? I'm curious kind of your thoughts of the reverberations of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it will set a precedent. And I think that that's really scary. And I think it's something that Missourians should be paying attention to because, our democracy was set up to find consensus and to work together and to listen and to do the will of the people. That cannot look like one person in one office dictating something based on their own personal beliefs when, there's a whole government machine, working to do good work for Missourians. It's disappointing to see what's happening. And I am afraid that it's going to continue and we're going to keep seeing it. But, hopefully over the next several years, we're able to, add a little bit more balance to our legislature. And maybe we'll see a little bit less extremism across the board.
So let's shift gears to actual races involving candidates. Recently, Minority Leader Crystal Quade entered the race to succeed Governor Mike Parson, who cannot run again due to term limits. Here's a clip of her talking about why she decided to jump into this statewide contest.
I decided to run for governor, quite frankly, because Missouri's government has just become too extreme. The last few years that I've been in Jefferson City for 7 years now, and each year it's become more divisive and less attention spent on Missourians and more attention spent on politics. And I decided to jump in just because, frankly, folks have had enough of that. To answer your second question of what folks can expect out of a Quade governorship is investment in Missouri, investing in things that our government needs to be providing for people. Infrastructure investment in our departments, everything from Children's Division to making sure that our license bureaus are actually functioning so that folks don't have to waste their time every single day when they need services from our state.
So 2-part question. What was your reaction to Quade getting into the race, and how does she navigate this contest if she is able to get the Democratic nomination for this post?
Yeah, well, my response was so thrilled. You may be able to hear it in my voice. I'm smiling ear to ear. I am so excited that Crystal jumped into this race. Democrats have no better voice right now for this position than Crystal. She's been a Democratic leader for the last 5 years in our caucus, and she has made the Democratic voice in the legislature more and more relevant with every year she's been there. And so it's really exciting. I think that in terms of how she's going to navigate this, first of all, I'm convinced she will be our Democratic nominee. So the way that Crystal is going to do this is she's going to speak to Missourians. She's going to talk to them about the issues that they're actually facing. The kitchen table issues that we always talk about during campaigns look nothing like the fights we've been having in the legislature. I hear so often folks saying, why do you keep screaming about trans rights and all of these wedge issues. And we say over and over again, the majority party sets the agenda. We're just playing defense. And so, we're on their terms, but Crystal can change that narrative. Crystal can start talking about Democratic priorities for Missourians and what that would look like from an executive branch standpoint. The governor has such unique powers, and listening to Crystal talk about what her plans are and what she hopes for Missouri, it's so inspiring. It's so exciting. She has a social work background. She's a mom. She knows what Missourians want. She knows what Missouri families need. And she's going to have the right message, the right moderate message for Missourians, not just in the Democratic strongholds across our state, but all over.
Wow. This is like the 9th time you've segued nicely to my next question. So anybody who's listened to me talk about Democratic statewide aspirations on this show may feel like I'm being a broken record on this, but I feel like I need to reiterate this. Democrats are not going to win statewide elections if they continue to get 20% in rural counties and they fail to win competitive suburbs like Platte County, right. Clay County. And I know Buchanan is not a suburb, but they used to win Buchanan County regularly, and they're not doing that anymore. So that's what they need to do. But the question has been, how do they do that? And as somebody who lives in a competitive suburb, I feel like you are uniquely qualified to answer that question.
Yeah, well, Crystal's been doing it since she ran for office the first time, right? She knows she flipped her seat from red to blue. And she has flipped, since then, she helped flip a second and a third seat in Springfield, so that we finally have 3 seats outside of this I-70 corridor of Democrats that we previously had. And so she knows the messaging. She knows, like I said, she knows what families want. She knows what families need. And she understands the nuances of all of these big issues that we talk about. So she can speak to folks individually. She can talk about these gun issues in a way that isn't extreme on one side or another. She can talk about the need for childcare because she's experienced it. She can talk about the desperate need for mental health resources because as a social worker, she has seen families in crisis. I think that I said it again, but she is just such a special voice and a voice at the right time for Missouri. I'm really excited to see her campaign unfold. I was at her kickoff on Tuesday evening in Springfield. I was so excited to be there, and just listening to her talk is incredibly inspiring.
On a prior episode of the show, one of your colleagues, Representative Steve Butts, said very bluntly that if Lieutenant Governor Kehoe wins the primary, it will be very difficult to defeat him because of his history of policy pragmatism. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. Unfortunately, for my colleague and friend, Lieutenant Governor Kehoe, I don't believe that he's going to get the nomination. I think that historically we've seen that in Missouri, Republican primaries try to move to the right of each other. And frankly, Lieutenant Governor Kehoe just cannot out-conservative Eigel and Ashcroft.
That is what Leader Quaid also assumes, too, which is why she mentioned Ashcroft specifically in her very well-done kickoff video, which included her literally I don't think she punched people, but she
She's checking people. It's roller derby.
Checking people with roller derby. But it seems to be like she assumes that Ashcroft will be the weaker candidate, and I think because what she said is he holds more conservative positions and in her view is more extreme. I guess conversely, he's won 2 statewide elections, albeit for a down ballot office, with like 60% of the vote. He has 100% name recognition because of his father, basically. Is he really the weaker candidate in this race, or do you think he could still be formidable because of the things I just said?
I think he is a weaker candidate because of his extremism. And I say that as someone who represents a community that is, I feel, really looks like a lot of these winnable sort of swing areas in our state. And what I can tell you is that folks in my district absolutely reject the idea of extremism on either side of the aisle. They are tired of the infighting. They're tired of the gridlock in Jefferson City. They're tired of a supermajority that can't get bills passed, and they're frustrated by it. And that's why I think Crystal has such a fantastic opportunity, because her message is simple, it's moderate, and it resonates with Missourians from all walks of life.
Another race that is more internal is who is going to succeed, basically our own version of succession. Who's going to replace Crystal Quaid when she is term limited? Either way, she won't be in the House anymore. And I've heard that you might be interested in that position.
Yes, that's true. I announced a few weeks ago that I am running for minority floor leader to lead the Democratic caucus once Crystal is termed out. She has been our floor leader for the past 5 years. It will be 6 total once she is done serving in the legislature, and she's done so much for the caucus and put us in such an incredible position that I feel like I have had a great opportunity to learn from her. I've seen what the caucus needs, what our members need, how I can best support them, and I really feel that I'm the right person to sort of take us into our next phase as Democrats in Missouri.
Yeah, what is your vision for that position and for House Democrats in the future?
Yeah, so I really, like I said, Crystal's put us in such a great position. She has built our party up. We have gained seats over the last several years. And I would like to continue doing that. I absolutely believe that in 2024, we will gain at least 3 seats and finally end the Republican supermajority. I'm very excited about that. And then beyond that, we're going to keep growing and we're going to continue being more and more relevant in Jefferson City. The way we do that is by continuing to build connections across the aisle with stakeholders, not only in our own communities, but across the state, building relationships with folks that may have felt that Democrats weren't really paying attention to them for a long time. One of the areas that we're really digging in on right now is ag. It's such a huge economic driver for our state. And a lot of times Democrats feel left out of that conversation. And some of the reason for that is it's our own fault for not, getting a seat at the table. And so that's one of the ways that, we're working to build bridges, build connections, and make sure we're representing all voices, all interests, and speaking to Missourians, not just in our districts, not just in the safe areas, but like I said earlier, across the state, because, if we're going to be more relevant in Missouri, we've got to expand our footprint.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Representative Aune, for joining us on the show. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is a part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can follow all of our coverage at STLPR.org. And Representative Aune, where can people find you on the internet where you want to be found?
You can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and now Threads. It's usually Ashley for Mo or Ashley for Missouri.
I'm really liking Threads so far. I just want to point that out there. And I think that as soon as they get a place where you can only see your own followers, it's Jover for Twitter.
I hope so.
I have an account too, but I'm waiting for a good opportunity to actually do my first post. I don't know why I'm being really paranoid about it, but
I'll still tag you whenever you have a story, Sarah.
Perfect. All right. Until next time, so long.